There's a phrase echoing across political halls tonight: strategic success. But behind those two words lies a storm of consequence that no press release can contain. Israel's leadership calls it a necessary campaign, an operation to restore deterrence, to ensure security for its citizens, to dismantle what it calls the infrastructure of terror. Yet when you strip away the speeches and the slogans, what remains is a battlefield of smoke, silence, and staggering human cost. In military terms, the operation has delivered visible gains: territorial control in parts of Gaza, the capture or elimination of key figures, intelligence networks disrupted, and stockpiles of weapons uncovered. On paper, the achievements appear substantial. But wars are not fought on paper, they unfold in the lives of people, in the shadows of homes turned to rubble, in the eyes of a mother searching through ruins for her child. And that is where the story changes. For Israel, every advancement on the ground is presented as a symbol of strength, a statement that it will not be intimidated or outmaneuvered. Yet that same strength carries a cost that ripples far beyond the borders of the battlefield. In the rush to assert control, something intangible is slipping away, the moral high ground. The world that once saw Israel as a nation defending itself is beginning to question the price of that defense. The power of perception is as crucial as the power of arms. In the age of live-streamed warfare, every strike is recorded, every explosion replayed, every consequence magnified. The images flooding social media are not of victories, they are of devastation. Streets reduced to craters, hospitals overwhelmed, families waving white flags amid chaos. And so, while the government speaks of tactical wins, the global audience hears something different: a cry for accountability. Analysts describe this as a conflicted victory. On one side, Israel's military machine demonstrates precision and capability. On the other, it faces the growing storm of international outrage. Each missile that hits a target is followed by a wave of moral backlash. Each operation designed to eliminate an enemy cell simultaneously erodes public sympathy. It's a paradox that modern warfare cannot escape. The stronger the strike, the weaker the narrative of justice becomes. Inside Israel, the tone is both defiant and anxious. There's pride in the military's efficiency, but beneath it, whispers of uncertainty. How sustainable are these gains? How long can they last before resentment reignites the conflict? History shows that every demolished stronghold becomes the seed of a new resistance. Power suppresses, but it rarely eliminates. The deeper question now is not whether Israel can control Gaza, it's whether it can control the consequences of that control. For decades, Israel's strategy has hinged on deterrence, the belief that overwhelming force discourages aggression. But deterrence has a short memory. Each offensive may silence opposition temporarily, but every strike also breeds new anger, new generations that grow up beneath rubble and remember the destruction as their inheritance. The gains of today may be the grievances of tomorrow, and yet, in the corridors of power, these nuances often fade. What matters is the image of victory, the photo ops, the speeches, the narrative of resilience. It's a cycle that repeats with grim familiarity. Violence erupts, statements are issued, and once the smoke clears, leaders declare success. But the ground tells a different story. A story of displacement, of infrastructure turned to ash, of communities stripped of the basic right to exist without fear. The term strategic depth is often used to justify such campaigns. But what does strategic depth mean in a place measured in kilometers, where every strike touches civilians, where every gain carves a deeper wound? The reality is that military superiority doesn't automatically translate to peace. It may bring temporary control, but not stability. True power isn't in dominance, it's in endurance. And endurance belongs to those who survive, not necessarily to those who conquer. In the broader regional context, Israel's assertive posture sends a message that it will decide the terms of engagement with or without approval. Yet that message is being heard in ways that may not serve its long-term goals. The Arab world, watching with a mix of outrage and fatigue, sees the offensive as another chapter in a long pattern of imbalance. Meanwhile, global powers are recalculating. The very allies who once applauded Israel's precision are now quietly questioning the wisdom of its persistence. Behind closed doors, diplomats whisper what few will say publicly, that these gains may be eroding Israel's soft power faster than any military success can rebuild it. The images of children pulled from debris, the footage of aid trucks turned away, the sound of grief broadcast live. These are the moments that reshape international opinion. And in the 21st century, public perception is no less powerful than a military alliance. The narrative of victory is becoming harder to sustain. Each press conference declaring progress is met with new evidence of suffering. Each announcement of security achieved contrasts with the visible insecurity of those living under siege. For a nation that values global legitimacy as much as territorial defense, this is a delicate balance. A war not just of territory, but of truth. The growing challenge now is internal as much as external. Within Israel, divisions deepen. Supporters of the operation see it as essential to safety, while critics fear it is isolating the country diplomatically and morally. The political cost of these gains could be as heavy as the military toll. It's a gamble, one that relies on short-term victories to secure long-term political survival. But history rarely rewards such gambles. Military power can capture ground, but it cannot capture trust. It can destroy, but it cannot reconcile. And while the current campaign strengthens one nation's control, it simultaneously weakens its image in the eyes of the world, a world that now measures leadership not only by might, but by mercy. As the dust settles on each operation, the haunting truth remains: every gain claimed in the language of security is mirrored by a loss written in the language of humanity. For every headline celebrating a successful strike, there's a family mourning in silence. For every official map shaded to show expansion, there's a neighborhood erased. And in that contrast lies the real battle, the struggle not for land or leverage, but for moral legitimacy. Because in the end, the question that will echo far beyond this war is not who held the ground, but who held their humanity. In the heart of Gaza tonight, the war is no longer a clash of armies, it's a war against survival itself. Streets that once carried the noise of markets now echo with the rumble of collapsing walls. The skyline is unrecognizable, the air thick with dust and grief. Beneath that haze, people search for the barest fragments of normal life. A loaf of bread, a drop of clean water, the sound of a child's breathing in the dark. What was once described as a conflict zone has transformed into a humanitarian abyss. Aid convoys crawl through shattered roads under the watch of drones. Hospitals, those that still stand, are running out of medicine, power, and hope. Doctors operate by the light of cell phones, performing surgeries without anesthesia. Children line up not for school, but for water that comes once a day, sometimes not at all. The numbers are staggering, but the real story isn't in the statistics. It's in the silence between explosions, the moments where families realize there is no safe place left to run. Every neighborhood tells a story of loss. Apartment blocks turned to skeletons, playgrounds buried under concrete, mosques and churches converted into shelters that can no longer shelter. And yet, through the chaos, there's an unspoken rhythm. People still cooking when they can, still praying, still trying to hold on to rituals that remind them of life before the sky fell. That resilience, raw and fragile, is what defines the Palestinian spirit tonight. The human toll cannot be measured by casualties alone. It's in the psychological weight, the trauma etched into the minds of those who have seen too much too soon. Children draw pictures not of dreams, but of drones. Their first words are not mama or baba, but missile and sirens. Generations are being raised under curfew, under rubble, under fear, and yet somehow they keep going. That endurance is not a headline, it's a quiet rebellion against extinction. The humanitarian agencies call it a crisis. But crisis suggests something temporary, something with an end. For the people living it, this is daily life. Electricity flickers for minutes at a time, and those few moments are treated like a miracle. Bread becomes currency, clean water, a luxury. Parents skip meals so their children can eat, and as the world debates the politics, the people on the ground count calories, count minutes, count the ones they've lost. The war has stripped Gaza not only of infrastructure, but of identity. Schools are gone, libraries buried, cultural centres reduced to ashes. What remains is memory, and even memory is being targeted. When you erase a place's history, you erase its people twice. Once physically, once spiritually. That's the cruelty of this conflict. It doesn't just kill bodies, it tries to kill belonging. Across the shattered neighborhoods, the faces are haunting. Mothers clutching photos because it's all they have left. Fathers digging with bare hands because there's no machinery left to clear the debris. Children with eyes too old for their age, learning that grief is part of the morning routine. The smell of smoke mixes with the smell of fear, and still, somehow, they survive. And as the suffering deepens, the world's attention flickers, trending hashtags rise and fall. 1 week of outrage, 1 week of silence. But for those inside Gaza, the horror doesn't refresh with the algorithm. It lingers unending. They don't have the privilege of switching it off. They live where the headlines come from. Every sound outside could be the last one they hear. There's a phrase often used: collateral damage. It sounds clean, bureaucratic, detached. But what it really means are faces, not numbers. It means a grandmother who spent her last moments holding a grandchild she couldn't protect. It means a newborn taking its first breath inside a tent because the hospital is gone. It means dreams buried before they were ever lived. That's not collateral, that's the cost of human indifference. Humanitarian groups are pleading for corridors, for safe zones, for a pause in the nightmare. But aid can only do so much when the roads are gone and the air is thick with danger. Supplies rot in trucks waiting for clearance, while inside Gaza, people make soup from rainwater and grass. The word starvation is no longer hypothetical. It's visible in the hollowness of faces, in the way children's clothes hang looser by the day, yet amid the desperation, acts of compassion emerge, neighbours sharing the last of their bread, medics refusing to abandon their posts, strangers pulling strangers from rubble. Humanity flickers like a candle in the wind, fragile but persistent. In those moments, even in the ruins, you see a kind of beauty, defiance dressed as kindness, survival disguised as love. For every image of destruction, there's another image the world rarely sees. A father telling stories by candlelight to calm his children, a mother teaching her kids how to laugh in the pauses between airstrikes. These are not scenes of surrender, they're scenes of resistance, of life refusing to bow to death. The humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza is more than a tragedy. It's a moral test for the global community. Every delayed convoy, every unheeded plea, every shrug from powerful nations becomes part of the record of failure. Silence is no longer neutrality, it's participation, and the people suffering know it. They know who watches, who speaks, and who looks away. The suffering has reached a scale that words struggle to contain. It's not just hunger, it's hopelessness. It's not just loss, it's erasure. And as aid agencies warn of collapse, one truth remains: this is not a natural disaster, it's a man-made one. The destruction didn't come from the earth. It came from decisions, from orders, from politics disguised as security. As night falls over Gaza, the hum of generators fills the void where city lights used to glow. Families gather in darkness, waiting for food, for news, for peace. Some pray, some weep, some simply stare into the shadows, too tired to feel anything at all. And somewhere, deep inside that exhaustion, is a question the world can't seem to answer. How much suffering will it take before compassion becomes action? For the people living this nightmare, hope is both weapon and wound. They cling to it because it's all they have left. But every passing day makes it harder to hold. Still, they whisper the same word: tomorrow, not as a guarantee, but as a prayer, a promise to themselves that even in the darkest night, dawn must come. Behind every ceasefire call, every diplomatic headline, there's another battlefield, one that doesn't use bombs or bullets, but leverage and language. Tonight, the pressure isn't coming from rockets, it's coming from Washington. The world's most powerful nation finds itself in a moral dilemma, caught between loyalty and legitimacy, between alliance and accountability. The United States has long been a cornerstone of military and political support, but now that same ally is becoming the architect of restraint. And that pressure, though polite in tone, is seismic in consequence. Inside government briefings and late-night calls, the tension is thick. One side insists that security must come before peace. The other warns that peace will never come through endless security operations. It's a diplomatic chess match, and every move has global repercussions. As humanitarian crises unfold in real time, American officials are walking a tightrope, balancing compassion with calculation. Their public message sounds firm, but the subtext tells a different story. The pressure is real, but the limits are clear. Behind the scenes, the conversations are anything but calm. Intelligence briefings filled with images of devastation circulate through the highest offices. Advisors warn that the optics are shifting, that the longer the war drags on, the harder it becomes to justify unconditional support. And yet, within those same walls, political realities hold sway. There's an election looming. There are defense contracts to consider. There's the fear of being seen as abandoning an ally. In politics, morality often moves slower than strategy. Publicly, statements are crafted with precision, calls for restraint, for measured response, for humanitarian access. But the words, while diplomatic, are drenched in contradiction. On one hand, the US calls for a ceasefire. On the other, it continues to supply the means to sustain the war. The message to the world is conflicted. Stop fighting, but keep fighting carefully. And in that contradiction lies the heart of the crisis. Pressure in international politics is never clean. It's not about shouting or sanctions. It's about subtle power, the kind that shapes behavior through expectations, funding, and fear of isolation. For years, that pressure flowed one way, outward, toward the Middle East. But now the current is reversing. Global outrage, fueled by raw, unfiltered images, has begun to turn that same pressure back on Washington. Citizens, lawmakers, activists, they're all asking the same question: how long can America preach peace while enabling war? The halls of diplomacy are filled with calculated tones, but underneath there's urgency. US negotiators shuttle between capitals, trying to craft a ceasefire that looks like victory to one side and mercy to the other. But diplomacy doesn't move at the pace of suffering. While deals are drafted, bombs still fall. While policy papers circulate, families still flee. The gap between negotiation and reality grows wider by the hour. And the question becomes, what does pressure mean when lives are measured in minutes? For Washington, this is not just about Gaza. It's about credibility. Every delayed response, every cautious statement chips away at the image of moral leadership that once defined the superpower. Allies in Europe whisper doubts. Leaders in the global south speak more bluntly. The narrative of defender of democracy starts to crack under the weight of double standards. And for a generation watching online, trust in that narrative is fading fast. They see the footage, not the press briefings. They hear the cries, not the spin. They know that empathy should not come with conditions. Inside the power corridors, strategists frame it differently. They call it a balancing act. They argue that diplomacy requires patience, that real change happens quietly, not on camera. But for those outside the rooms, the quiet feels like complicity. The world is too connected now. Every delay becomes visible. Every silence is heard. Every diplomatic pause becomes a headline. The days when wars could be fought in shadows are gone. The irony is striking. The very nation that once wrote the rulebook on international order now struggles to follow its own script. When civilian suffering becomes too visible to ignore, pressure transforms from a policy tool into a moral burden. The US can urge restraint, but it cannot unsee what the world has seen. It can promise aid, but it cannot undo the destruction made possible by its weapons. The weight of that contradiction grows heavier with every passing day. And while leaders exchange statements, the ground realities don't wait for diplomacy to catch up. The humanitarian crisis intensifies, and the calls for accountability grow louder. Protesters march in major cities, not just for Gaza but for integrity. They hold up signs not just against war, but against selective empathy. For many, this isn't just a foreign policy issue, it's a mirror reflecting the soul of a nation that claims to stand for human rights. Behind closed doors, there are signs of discomfort. Advisors know that history will not remember the speeches. It will remember the suffering that followed them. The talk of leverage and influence sounds hollow when weighed against images of starving children. But even so, the machinery of politics grinds on. Every move is calculated to preserve relationships, to protect national interest, to maintain influence in a region where influence often comes at a human price. Pressure from the United States has power. It always has. But power without moral clarity loses its force. In a world that now consumes truth through screens, the optics of indifference are lethal. When the words freedom, democracy, and human rights are spoken by those who fund destruction, they echo differently. They sound like slogans, not values. And that echo is now reaching back to the source. The push for a ceasefire isn't just political, it's existential. It's about reclaiming moral ground that's slipping away faster than policymakers can respond. Because while diplomacy is about timing, humanity doesn't wait. The longer the suffering continues, the more every diplomatic hesitation feels like betrayal. And somewhere in that space between action and inaction, the credibility of the world's most powerful nation is being rewritten. Tonight, the question isn't whether pressure is being applied. It's whether it's enough. Enough to change decisions, enough to stop bombs, enough to remind leaders that influence means nothing if it cannot prevent suffering. The pressure is real, but time is relentless. And history, as always, will not remember the deals made in silence. It will remember the voices that broke through it. Somewhere behind the podiums, beneath the sound of applause and protest, one man stands in the middle of a storm of his own making. He's a leader under siege, from enemies outside, from allies within, and from the world that watches every move like a live broadcast of history unfolding in real time. His name may define a nation's politics, but his decisions now define its isolation. Tonight, the battlefield isn't only in Gaza, it's inside the halls of power, where every whisper could collapse a coalition and every silence could cost a legacy. In political circles, they call it a balancing act. But what he's performing isn't balance, it's survival. On one side, hardliners who see compromise as weakness. On the other, growing international outrage demanding restraint. Between them stands a leader running out of room to maneuver. His challenge is not just to lead a war, but to justify it, to keep a country convinced that suffering brings safety, that destruction leads to peace. It's a story told with conviction, but the cracks are beginning to show. Inside his cabinet, the mood is split. Generals push for escalation, warning that any pause signals vulnerability. Diplomats argue for caution, fearing that the longer the offensive continues, the deeper the isolation becomes. Political allies whisper about timing, how every strike, every decision could reshape the next election. The air is thick with ambition and anxiety. No one says it out loud, but they all know the war may be fought in Gaza, but its consequences are coming home. For the Prime Minister, every televised address is a test of control. The tone must be strong enough to appease nationalists, yet measured enough not to ignite global fury. Each word is chosen like ammunition, carefully, strategically designed to signal defiance while concealing desperation. He presents himself as unshakable, but behind closed doors, aides describe moments of exhaustion, nights without sleep, meetings that stretch until dawn. A man surrounded by power, but haunted by the realization that power is slipping through his fingers. His political survival depends on perception. To his supporters, he's a guardian of the nation, a leader who refuses to bow to outside pressure. To his critics, he's a man cornered by his own rhetoric, trapped in a narrative he can no longer control. Every new offensive, every extension of the campaign buys him time politically but costs him credibility internationally. The more he claims victory, the more the world sees chaos. The more he insists on security, the more his own citizens question what that word even means. Inside Israel, protests are stirring, some demanding accountability, others urging the government to stay the course. The nation itself feels split, not just along political lines, but moral ones. Families who once stood united in fear now argue over purpose. Soldiers return home to questions that don't have answers. And the leader who built his career on strength must now confront the one thing he cannot control: doubt. The pressure is no longer coming just from the outside world, it's coming from within. Business leaders warn of economic fallout. Human rights advocates amplify stories of civilian suffering. Young Israelis, raised on the promise of security through power, are beginning to ask whether that promise was ever real. Every crisis that once rallied the nation now exposes its fractures. And at the center of those fractures stands a man whose image has become both a symbol of defiance and a reminder of division. Behind the scenes, his inner circle grows smaller. Old allies drift away, wary of the political cost of proximity. International relationships strain under the weight of condemnation. And yet, he holds on, not through charisma, but through calculation. Every delay in diplomacy, every deflection in interviews, every refusal to acknowledge failure is part of a strategy that values endurance over empathy. His critics call it stubbornness, his supporters call it resilience. But both sides agree it's unsustainable. In moments of candor, even those closest to him admit the truth. This isn't about policy anymore, it's about legacy. Leaders who rise through conflict often find they cannot live without it. Peace doesn't offer the same headlines. It doesn't inspire the same loyalty, and so the war becomes more than a military campaign, it becomes political oxygen. Without it, the narrative collapses. With it, the nation bleeds. It's a choice between image and integrity, and the scales are tipping. The international community watches with cautious frustration. They see a man trying to maintain the posture of control while juggling the consequences of his choices. Meetings behind closed doors grow tenser. Each conversation with global powers feels like an ultimatum disguised as diplomacy. They urge restraint, yet his instinct is defiance. To him, compromise looks like surrender. And surrender in politics is death. Yet even the strongest leaders eventually face moments when the mask slips. Reports from insiders paint a portrait of someone deeply aware of the stakes, but unwilling to show it. He speaks of resilience, but his eyes betray fatigue. He dismisses the protests, yet tracks every headline. He assures his people of victory, even as he privately asks advisors what victory could possibly look like now. The balancing act has become a tightrope walk over fire. One misstep, one political scandal, one failed negotiation, one humanitarian image too powerful to ignore, and everything collapses. The pressure isn't just about the war, it's about accountability. For the first time, the narrative he's written for years is being rewritten in real time, and he no longer holds the pen. Around him, the walls are closing in. Opposition parties smell opportunity. Allies abroad hint at consequences. The streets outside his residence fill with chants that no longer sound like support, but warning. History has a cruel way of turning its heroes into symbols of the very crises they tried to control. And for this leader, the irony is brutal. The war meant to preserve his legacy may be the one that ends it. Still, he holds the podium, repeating the same lines about strength, survival, sovereignty. The cadence is familiar, almost rehearsed, but the tone has changed. The confidence that once carried his speeches now trembles beneath the surface. He's not speaking to inspire anymore. He's speaking to endure, and endurance in politics is often just another word for denial. The world can sense the shift. The myth of invincibility is cracking. What was once seen as dominance now looks like desperation, and as cameras capture his every word, the real story is happening in the silence between them. A story of a man fighting not for victory, but for relevance in a world that's beginning to move on without him. The war has fallen quiet. For now, the guns are still, the sky's a little less red, and yet what lingers in the silence is louder than any explosion. Gaza lies in ruins. Families sift through ash that was once home. Leaders give speeches about peace while the ground beneath them still trembles. This isn't the end of a war, it's the pause between chapters, and the world, wary but watching, wonders what kind of story will be written next. Around the globe, the tone has shifted, the shock has given way to reflection, the outrage to exhaustion. But beneath the surface, something deeper brews, a reckoning not just with policy, but with conscience. What has this war truly achieved? What has it destroyed not only in Gaza or Israel, but in humanity itself? The ceasefire may have stopped the noise, but it has not stopped the questions, and those questions are louder than ever. Every ceasefire begins as a headline, but it lives or dies in the hearts of those who have lost everything. In Gaza, peace is not a word of comfort. It's a reminder of promises broken too many times to count. People rebuild walls knowing they might fall again. Children draw in the dirt because there are no schools left. The truce offers a breath, not a future. And yet, somehow, even amid the dust and despair, hope flickers, fragile, stubborn, alive. The scenes on the ground defy easy narration. Soldiers pulling out of ruined streets. Aid workers entering with trembling hands. Families returning to find their houses reduced to frames of concrete and twisted iron. The world calls it recovery. But to recover, something must remain. And here, what remains is memory, raw, painful, unhealed. The war may pause, but trauma doesn't. It lingers in every sound, in every silence. Outside the region, leaders exchange cautious smiles. They speak of progress, of steps forward, of awed-won peace. But behind those smiles lies fatigue. This conflict has tested alliances, strained economies, and eroded the illusion that global powers can still shape the moral compass of the world. Each statement of support now comes with hesitation, each declaration of solidarity with a shadow of guilt. The language of diplomacy has never sounded so hollow. For the people watching across continents, this moment feels heavier than the headlines. It's not just about borders or ceasefires, it's about the haunting realization that humanity keeps repeating itself. Every war begins with a justification and ends with regret. Every side claims necessity, every civilian pays the price, and still history finds a way to rhyme with itself, as if we have learned nothing at all. Yet something is changing, not in palaces or parliaments, but in the public. The internet has made witnesses of us all. The suffering is no longer hidden behind filters or distance. It's live, it's visceral, it's undeniable. The images of mothers wailing over their children, of fathers digging through rubble with bare hands. They've pierced through propaganda, through politics, straight into the world's collective conscience. For the first time, the global audience is not just watching war, it's questioning it. And that, perhaps, is the true shift, the power of perception. The voices of ordinary people, amplified through screens, are shaping the story more than the speeches of presidents. Young generations across the world are redefining what it means to take a stand. They're not waiting for official statements, they're making their own. Hashtags have become megaphones, online protests have become moral movements. And while critics dismiss them as noise, history may one day remember them as the sound of awakening. Meanwhile, within Israel, within Gaza, and across the diaspora, communities are reckoning with loss that numbers can't describe. The word victory has lost meaning. The word justice feels distant. But amid the wreckage, humanity still breathes. People share what little they have. Neighbors rebuild together. Strangers comfort strangers. The smallest acts, a loaf of bread, a lifted brick, a whispered prayer, become gestures of defiance against despair. They remind the world that even when politics fails, compassion endures. The war's shadow stretches far beyond the Middle East. It reaches into every home where news still plays in the background. It forces conversations at dinner tables, divides friendships, challenges faiths. But maybe that's necessary. Maybe we've been too comfortable looking away. This conflict, brutal as it is, has exposed something raw about our time. That empathy has become political and silence has become a stance. Tonight, the global conscience feels heavier than ever. The ceasefire may bring quiet, but not clarity. The leaders talk of stability, yet the world feels anything but stable. The human cost is too visible to ignore, too immense to dismiss. And so, even as the dust settles, the question that hangs over us is not who won, but who we've become. The moral wound left by this war will not heal easily. The images of suffering will fade from screens, but not from the minds of those who saw them. Journalists will move to the next story, politicians to the next summit. But for the people who lived it, the story continues every morning they wake to ruins. And for the rest of us, the test remains. Whether we choose to remember or to forget, the world is tired of conflict, yet addicted to its drama. We mourn the innocent, but move on quickly when the headlines change. That cycle, that amnesia, is what keeps history repeating. But somewhere out there, in the midst of the rubble, in the hearts of those still standing, someone still believes that maybe, just maybe, peace can be something more than a pause between wars. And that belief, however faint, is what holds the world together tonight. It's not written in treaties or carved into monuments. It lives in people, in the ones who refuse to let hatred define them, who rebuild when everything around them is broken, who dare to forgive even when the world gives them every reason not to. That, more than any negotiation or ceasefire, is the true resistance. So, as the cameras turn away and the world moves on, there's one truth that should echo louder than the silence of the ceasefire wars may be fought by armies, but peace is built by survivors. And in the quiet that follows destruction, it's their voices, not the voices of power, that the world needs to hear next. Tonight, after months of fire and fury, one truth cuts through the smoke. No side leaves this war unscarred. Israel has gained ground, yes, but at a cost that no map can measure. Gaza has lost cities, generations and dreams, yet its people still stand, tired, hungry, unbroken. The United States, caught between alliance and morality, finds itself facing the mirror of its own contradictions, and the rest of the world watches, forced to ask what peace really means when humanity itself feels like the casualty. This isn't just a story about nations. It's a story about people, mothers who refuse to stop searching, fathers who still whisper prayers, children who have learned the language of fear before the language of love. These are not numbers, they are the soul of what remains when politics burns away. In the corridors of power, leaders will speak of strategy, of borders, of deterrence. But in the streets, in the shelters, in the silence after the sirens, the real war continues, the war to stay human. Because peace is not signed on paper, it's rebuilt piece by piece by those who choose to live when everything around them tells them not to. The cameras will soon turn elsewhere, the headlines will fade. But what happened here will not vanish with the news cycle. It will echo in the hearts of the grieving, in the conscience of the watching, and in the history that refuses to forget. The world can rebuild walls, but it cannot rebuild innocence. And so, as this chapter closes, one lesson remains. Power may shape the battlefield, but compassion shapes the future. No nation, no leader, no army will ever win the war against humanity itself. The question left before us all is simple, and it will define generations. Will we learn, or will we watch the same fire in a different sky again and again? The choice is ours, and history is already listening. This has been the story of war, loss and awakening, but perhaps if the world still has the courage to care, it can also be the beginning of something we've almost forgotten how to believe in: peace.